Where do Brannon's philosophies on recovery and sexuality come from?
Welcome to the Real Talk Recovery Podcast with the Therapy Brothers.
We're brothers, we're therapists, and we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
All right, you guys, welcome to the show. This is going to be a different episode. I think I'm excited to share some of my story and to fill you in on kind of my life a little bit. So it's interesting to think to do this episode. I don't open up a ton about my life. I talk some about my marriage on the show and things like that, but you're going to get a peek behind the curtain today. A little bit on who I am and why I am the way that I am. I was talking to somebody a little while back and they were asking me like, well, what's your story? And I told them a little bit and I said something like, I don't think I have that amazing of a story. And she said, actually, your story is really profound and really important. And people need to hear it. And I thought, why? And then as I examined it, I realized that it actually is very important. And my life has been unique and interesting. And it's also really important. And I hope that as I share my story today, that something bigger will happen other than just hearing parts of my life. I've gone through an evolution and a paradigm shift in my life. And I hope that as I go through this, that you'll be able to see it and maybe it will help you evolve as well. Or at least appreciate the evolution that I've gone through. So, let's get into it. Let's do it. So, starting in my childhood, I'm not going to give you every detail, but I was raised very religious. Latter-day Saint, Mormon is what a lot of people know us as. I was raised religious. We'd go to church every Sunday. Just a huge part of our life was our religion. And I didn't know it, but I was in a pretty rigid religious system, just being in the culture and in the systems that I was in growing up. And as part of that, sexuality there's a lot in the culture around that. A lot of it was that sexuality was supposed to fit in a certain box. And if it didn't, that was a problem. And also it's kind of an awkward topic. Sexuality oftentimes equated to sin. And that wasn't really spoken, but it was in the undertone of things that doing anything sexual was lustful, problematic, or of the devil, unless you're married and having sex in your marriage. So other than that, do the best that you possibly can to not be as sexual as possible. So not a ton of education. There was a lot of what not to do, and that's what it was about. So I was a late bloomer. I was naive, and I actually appreciate my naivety up into my early adolescence and even teenage years. Like having a wet dream, I didn't really even know what was going on. I was pretty sheltered and pretty naive, I think. So right before I left on my LDS mission, about a year or two before, that's when the internet really started to actually come out. And I remember talking to my parents about the internet, and I said, you guys got to get this internet thing like in your house. And my mom said, oh, we're not going to do that because all that's on there is pornography. And I thought to myself, like, no, you don't understand. This thing's bigger than that. But it's interesting if you listen to that story of the immediate thought about that is we need to make sure that you don't see pornography. I was in my adolescence really naive. I was trying my best to be righteous. I didn't really understand or know what masturbation was. I saw pornography a few times. I didn't indulge in it very often. I found it in a park when I was really young, like maybe 10 or 11. But other than that, like I didn't consume it regularly, and I didn't masturbate. And because I was trying to be good, and being a good person was being as not sexual as I possibly could be. And I think there were some great benefits to that. I didn't fall into an addiction or anything like that. In order to go on a church mission with our church, you have to be worthy. And what that means is you have to pass a series of interviews in order to go. And it's not like they sit and they test you, but they just check out to see, like, have you done any transgressions that make you unworthy to go on a mission? And a lot of those things are about sexuality. So how much porn are you using? Are you masturbating? Have you acted out with girls or those type of things? So I went to my mission interviews and passed with flying colors because I was this naive, rigid, righteous kid that had hardly ever touched his penis. And so I go on my mission, and the mission, there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of, you're supposed to be obedient. Your blessings and your success on your mission, at least what I was taught in my mission, was predicated upon your righteousness and your obedience. And so I was in this mold of just being the best that I possibly could be so I could have the best outcomes in my life. And it was this force and control thing. And I was taught that even before my mission, that if you're righteous, you will be blessed. If you're obedient, then you will get what you want. And so I applied that on my mission. I had a good mission. Things were fine, no problem. But I was really solidifying this frame of mind within myself of, I need to clamp down and make sure I don't sin and make sure I do good so that I can get what I want in my life and have the life that I want. They call it holding to the, it's kind of ironic. They call it holding to the rod. So if you hold to this rod of iron, it's a metaphor. If you hold to this rod, then you will stay safe and you will get back to the tree of life. You will be okay. But if you deviate and let go of that rod, you will end up falling away, and things will not be good for you. So I believe that wholeheartedly. I was soaking that in. I was living that. And I would say some of my friends would say, it's interesting because I had friends on both sides of the coin. I have friends more rigid than me, who are trying to be more righteous than me. And then I had friends who I think they thought that I was a bit of a prude. Like, come on, dude, like loosen up a little bit. Like, life's not as serious as you're making it out to be. So in the meantime, I was in the middle of two brothers. So Tyler's, my oldest brother. And I didn't really know what was going on with them behind the scenes, because we never really talked about like what was going on with the internet, what was going on with girls. Like, they wouldn't open up about like things they would do with girls or anything like that, because we needed to keep it secret, because it was such a big deal if you made mistakes. And the only person you'd really talk to about those things is your church leader, so that you could get your transgressions out. So, I tell stories about things like my friend asking for a blessing like a blessing from God so that he won't have any bad thoughts. Friends feeling extremely guilty for having wet dreams. Just almost all of my friends, now I know this, almost all of my friends were masturbating in high school, but I didn't know that about any of them. We didn't talk about it much, but it was just assumed that they weren't, but they actually were. And so that's an interesting thing, because they were told that they shouldn't be, but they actually were. And the old me, the young me, would have judged them and said that they were sinning. The new me looks at that as stages of development and a part of the process of figuring out your sexuality. So went on my mission, got married, and knew very little about sex when I got married. So naive, and got into my career. And it's interesting. They asked me like, well, why'd you become a therapist treating sex addiction? I have an undergrad in economics. And at the time I was seeing, I got all of these friends struggling with pornography issues. And every church meeting, all the time, leaders were getting up saying, porn is bad, don't do it. It's bad, it's bad, it's bad. You shouldn't masturbate. You shouldn't lust. Porn is bad. And so at this point, like, I was kind of hearing that all my friends were kind of indulging in porn because the internet had just come out. These are 21-year-old guys. And I'm not justifying this, but it's just a reality. 21-year-old guys, raging hormones. And the internet is anonymous. It's affordable. It's available. It's right there. And so all my friends were consuming porn, and all the church leaders were saying, don't consume porn. And I was getting an undergrad in economics studying supply and demand. And I realized, whoa, there's going to be a big demand for treatment and helping people with porn issues, because this wave that's come from the internet with porn all over the place now. Well, I wasn't wrong. And I got to admit, there was another side of me that was a little bit, I would almost go as far to say arrogant in my desire to do good. I know that sounds backwards, but I thought, you know what? Like, I'm this unicorn who has seldomly done any of these things, and I'm going to help all the people. And I'm going to help all the people come back to the fold, come back to the anti-lust place, and not be sexual and be righteous instead. I'm kind of saying this tongue in cheek, but it was that way a little bit. I did have the desire to do good in my career. I wanted to actually help people. And my intention was that I wanted to help people. But my belief was the way that I helped people was to get them to stop these behaviors, is to get them to knock it off and get them to be righteous. So I got a job with a therapist named Jody, who was a terrible therapist and not a good human being. I would classify her as narcissistic, and she almost ran her practice like a cult. In fact, I wouldn't say almost. She ran her practice like it was a cult. And the cult was centered around attacking men's sexuality and controlling and getting partners to control their husband's sexuality. And she was LDS, she was rigid, religious. And you look at this, it's like, how was she so successful? She was making money hand over fist. And the reason is because she spoke right to that religiosity and right to that control. And so people were signing up for her groups like crazy. And it was very fear-based. It wasn't based in love. Honestly, her practice was based in greed to make money and pride and fear and control. But it was masked. She was very convincing. And she would convince the man that he was sick and wrong and not okay. And she would convince the woman that it was okay for her to step in and control the situation in order to deal with her sinner husband. Now, this makes me sick to talk about this, but I'm bumping along in my own kind of arrogant righteousness. And I come along Jody and I start drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit. And I start running groups for her and focusing on sobriety, focusing on, in quotation marks, relapse, slips. I remember processing in a group for 45 minutes the fact that this guy was attracted to a woman in the grocery store. He didn't do anything about it, but it was a big problem and it was not okay. And so we talked about that. I remember sitting in one of Jody's groups, and this guy, to show off to Jody, there was a little magazine with like a woman's like leg on it. And he's like, will you please turn that magazine over because I don't want to see that. He's trying to be really good and righteous and non-lustful. And I was getting trained in this model, and this model actually fit within my framework of what was right and what was good. I thought I was doing good things at the time. I watched men get emasculated. I watched women feel totally unsafe in relationships, get locked in fear and control and even pride. Jody would take them and help them get really prideful, judgmental, better than. And I watched it happen again and again and again. And I saw divorces happen. I saw, here's an example. There's this 18-year-old kid was trying to be worthy to go on a mission. And Jody thought it was a good idea that if he masturbated, his punishment was he couldn't see his family for 3 months. Well, he ended up masturbating in like November and couldn't go to Thanksgiving and Christmas with his family as a consequence for his masturbation. This is batshit crazy stuff. Oh, okay. Like, I remember sitting in another group where Jody said to a guy, or to a wife, actually, her husband had looked at pornography on the family computer and said to the wife, well, you should call the police because he didn't have a right to use your property for that. And you need to let them know that he's using your property without permission. This is crazy. Okay. Luckily, I could tell something was off a little bit, and my conscience was getting to me. At the time, I was also going around to different church like meetings, and I was giving lessons about the evils of pornography and lust, and why masturbation, porn, and lust are of the devil. And I was getting booked like crazy at this time. So what I mean is, like, so many church leaders wanted me to come and give that lesson because the internet was fresh, it was new, and we needed to save all these people from the evils of this sexuality coming into their lives. And I could speak to that perfectly. I'd pull out my little slide deck and we'd talk about how horrible all of this stuff is. Now, little side note, I'm not saying porn is fine. That's not what I'm saying. However, at the time, my message of fear and control and white knuckle and shutting down was the way. It was the righteous thing. It was the good thing. We teach, sobriety. Sobriety in the white book is no sex with anyone but your spouse. So that means no sex with yourself, which means no masturbation. And then obviously no sex with other people, and a progressive victory over lust. So that's what we would fight for in these groups, and we would work really hard to get. Now, all of this led to this culture of sex negative thinking, and where sexuality was not a thing that was good and okay and part of our human existence. Sexuality was not a thing that you could talk openly about. It wasn't a thing that you could deviate from other, the shoulds. It should just be exactly what it is. You're attracted to the opposite sex and you have sex with them when you're married, and that's what sex is. And that them, only them, are you attracted to. There wasn't sex positivity whatsoever. So as time went on, and also at this time, Jody was a dichotomy, because on one hand, she would shame and blame and just empower the partner in this fear and control. On the other hand, she was big into the codependent model, and she was big into helping partners see that they're co-addicts and codependents, and that they need to stop enabling. And what they need to do is just get big and hold these boundaries and distance themselves and blast their partner. And if they don't do that, then they're codependent. And so I was trained in this codependent model early on. And Barbara Steffens came out with her book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, which said, we're going to call it betrayal trauma. And betrayal trauma, I won't go on this too long, but when she came out with this, it shifted from, don't blame the partner at all, which is a good thing. It's betrayal trauma, but what that did, and there's a little thing that happened along with that, which is it made it so that we can even now more so blame sexuality, especially the man's sexuality, for all the problems in the relationship. His sexuality is the bull in the china closet that is absolutely creating every last problem. And so Barbara Steffens started training coaches, and this is what BTR uses now, and where we can now really stick with this sex negative model and call his sexuality abusive and horrible and the problem. So I just shifted right into that really easily. Let's not call the partners codependents or co-addicts. They have betrayal trauma from the trauma of their partner's sexual acting out. And again, I was teaching lessons on this. I was running groups. I was actually creating my own program at this point. I had gotten done with Jody. I had seen enough with Jody to realize it was a little bit over the top, that it wasn't that healthy, but I had been indoctrinated by her and then by my upbringing enough to go on my own. So I broke off with her, and I realized, okay, I'm going to do things a little different, but I still maintained a lot of the same beliefs of, principles of righteousness and all of these things. groups were focused, both the men's groups were focused on what, how to stay sober, and the women's groups were focused on if your husband stayed sober or not. I look back and I just think, wow, I was duped a little bit because I thought I was a warrior for truth. I really did. But I think that I actually did some damage under this model that I was teaching. I read the book The Four Agreements, and the Four Agreements are that book's awesome for the four agreements that are in it. But at the beginning of that book, there's a chapter about agreements and the agreements that we make and where they come from and those type of things. And that book rattled me a little bit, made me look at, why do I believe what I believe? When I look at the outcomes of my clients, a lot of them are getting sober, but they're not getting better. Like things aren't getting actually better. I'm under this construct of the way that I live and the way that I think, and I'm just going forward with it because it was just handed to me. I had a lot of beliefs about sex, a lot of beliefs about those type of things because it was just handed to me, and I was living under it, and I was doing a good job living under it. When I started podcasting with Ashton and Kobe, that's really when I started to shift a little bit, where I wanted to be open to the possibility that maybe I don't have it all figured out. I also wanted to be something inside of me was saying to me, like, just shaming and shutting down sexuality isn't healthy, and it's not good. And I remember Jennifer Finlayson Fife started to come out at about that time too, and she was fascinating to me because she was LDS and sex positive, and she would ride this line, this very uncomfortable line of giving permission for people to be their own individual selves as sexual beings while being in a relationship, and talking about how transparency and honesty and openness was the most important thing, not masturbating or not looking at porn. And she brought so much more to the table, and it rung true to me as I would listen to her of like, oh my gosh, this is the missing piece to a lot of the things that I've been doing. And a lot of the things that I've been doing have actually been teaching the opposite of what she's saying. A lot of things that I've been doing have been leading to secrecy, shame, hiding, pretending like it's one way, but it's actually another. And not acknowledging that our sexuality is within us, and it's unique, and it's there, and it's beautiful, and it's of God, and that it's an important part of who we are. So the Four Agreements kind of rattled me to challenge some of the things that I automatically believed. Finlayson Fife kind of came in after that of like, here's some other stuff you might be able to consider. I also started hearing horror story after horror story of people going into their church leaders and getting terrible advice. And we're taught that the church leader's called of God and is basically the voice of God for you to help you when you're struggling. And so they would go in and get terrible advice. And I could tell you that some of the stories. But maybe I'll share one or two quick ones. A young kid trying to go on his mission, masturbating every 3 months, tells his bishop that he had another slip up, and the bishop says, you're like a dog that goes back to his vomit. Ooh. Now, when I tell these things, like, I want you to understand, these aren't all church leaders. Like, a lot of them give good advice. How many times have I heard this one to a partner? If you are more available for him, just try to be available so that then he doesn't go out and act out this way. Ugh. And then the most famous one is, in order to stop this behavior, you need to read your scriptures and pray more. And if you read your scriptures and pray more, then the behavior will stop. The Lord will help you. Ugh. Okay. So I'm watching like church leaders give advice that's not working. And actually some advice that's really doing damage. And I could tell you some far more extreme ones that would really make your skin crawl. But I'm watching, like, the things we're learning at church is not helping this situation. So the very issue in many ways is caused by the rigidity at church. And then what happens is an issue like this comes up, and where do they go for help? To the church. They go to the church where they get more of the same rigidity and like not truth around sexuality, to speak bluntly. And they get those things reinforced, which then causes the problems more and more. And I'm watching this happen. So here I am in the church, but I'm also watching the church totally screw this up. On one hand, they're just saying, don't. It's bad. Don't do it. It's not okay. And on the other hand, they're not creating a community of openness and support. They're creating a community where everybody's pretending like these things aren't happening. That's why all my friends were masturbating while we were growing up, but nobody ever talked about it or knew about it, or because we all were not supposed to be. I read a book called The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck, and incredible book. She talks about how basically all of our peace and our freedom comes from getting in alignment with our integrity. Finlayson Fife said that the betrayal is caused by the dishonesty, and if somebody is honest, then they won't betray. And I was working with a couple of guys at this time, and they were masturbating. They were married men masturbating like once or twice a month, and they were saying, "I don't want to, and I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to do that." And they had done it again and again and again and again. And I remember saying to one of them, I said, instead of saying that you're not going to do it and you don't want to, how about tell the truth? I am going to do this and I want to do it. Because if you tell the truth, at least your spouse can actually start to trust you a little bit. Now, I know that sounds backwards, but this guy, he went back to his wife and he said, you know what? Like, I'm going to be honest with you about my desire to masturbate. And I'm just going to own it. And it's interesting what happened. She felt triggered, and then she felt some connection with him because he was honest. He actually had less of a desire to do it once he got that off his chest, because now he was honest and in his integrity. He wasn't trying to live this lie anymore. And so I started to notice that instead of trying to fall into the system that we've been given and all these shoulds, let's just work on our honesty and on our truth. Just try to show up as an authentic human being. Let's all stop pretending that, our sexuality all fits in a perfect box. I flew down to, this is a few years back. I started to develop this question in my mind. Was the pornography the problem? Or was it the beliefs around the pornography that caused the suffering? Now, I've worked with people all along the spectrum. I've worked with guys who view porn for 6 to 8 hours a day. Obviously, their lives are out of balance, and obviously they're pushing limits, and there's addiction there. I've worked with guys who think they're addicts because they have too many erections, and that's it. So they struggle more with the scrupulosity than they do with the actual addiction. And I've worked everywhere in between. And I've started to develop this question in my mind. The question was, is it the porn that's bad, or is it the beliefs around the porn that really causes the strife and the struggle and the shame and the disconnection in relationships? I actually think a lot of it comes back to what Finlay Sampaifa is saying is, if you can't show up as an honest human being in a relationship, what kind of relationship do you have? So what that means is, if you want to view porn, if you don't want to view porn, if you want to be sexual in this way or that way, start with knowing thyself. Who am I? And what is truth for me when it comes to my sexuality? Anyways, I went down to a good friend of mine. One of my best friends lives in Brazil, and he's Brazilian. And I stayed with him and his wife in their apartment in Brazil. And he's got a great marriage. I stayed with him for 5 days, and as a marriage therapist, and I can notice certain things, and they have so much love and trust and support and all this good stuff going on in their relationship. Pretty interdependent. They have their own lives, but they're really connected. I thought, man, Brazilians know how to do it. But we were driving in the car, and he pulls up his phone and he says, "God, my friends send me this all day." And there's porn all over the screen. My friends send me this all day. Like, do you think this is bad? And what's interesting is he's like, yeah, sometimes I look at it, but I usually don't, but sometimes I do. The interesting thing is his wife was sitting right there in this small car in the back seat. He's holding the porn up right in front of her, talking to me about how his friends sent it to him, and he looks at it. But he didn't think it was bad. She didn't think it was really bad either. And it was just like this thing. And it rocked my world because, like, to me, that's like this huge thing. Like, oh my gosh, he just pulled up porn in front of his wife. Like, what? And to them, it was like, oh yeah, whatever. And really, it was like they turned it off and it was like on with their day. Like, he just shut his phone down, like, on with their day, whatever. I thought, man, like, in the culture that I'm in, there's like just that could cause a divorce. With them, it was like it was like nothing. It didn't matter. And it kind of rocked my world a little bit. I started to kind of go on a journey of my own personal self-realization and figuring out my integrity and my truths beyond somebody forcing it down my throat, and challenging things that cause suffering, both for my clients and for myself. And as I went on this journey, I started to realize that my old way of doing things was not in my integrity. That any time there is force, fear, and control at the ground level, then that's leading towards creating suffering. And when there is love, self-acceptance, self-realization, openness, honesty, and vulnerability, that creates connection. It's interesting because I've been on both sides of the coin. I've been the one beating the drum of the rigidity. I've been part of creating the systems of, I believe, shame. And now that I'm a bit more sex positive, there's a little bit of backlash that I get. I'll say that differently. Now that I am sex positive, not a little bit more, now that I am sex positive, and that I want people to be who they are and honest and open, there's a little bit of backlash I get. I'm looked at as someone who's at times permissive, somebody who doesn't validate the partner, who's been betrayed. That's not what I try to do at all. Betrayal is a real thing. But operating in reality is the only way to get better. And forcing yourself back into this box is the opposite of getting better. And I've seen that happen again and again and again. When force and control are at the basis of it all, that leads to destroying the masculine and feminine polarity in a relationship. It leads to destroying the individual and the individual not knowing who they actually are in that relationship, which leads to the individual in the relationship having no strength, no authenticity. So when you go to therapy systems full of force and control and shame, they are creating the problem even more. Trust is built on honesty, empathy, and consistency over time. You will not be honest and empathetic in the box. You'll be honest and empathetic when you show up as you, when you know you, when you trust you. I was doing this lesson at a church once and got the question of I can't expect God to come be close to me and know God until I get more sober. So what do I need to do to get more sober? And the old me would have said, well, tighten your bottom lines, have these things, do this, do that, call your group every day to make sure that you... And the new me starts with grace and acceptance. And the new me said this: first, you need to start accepting you and loving you right where you're at, and knowing that God is with you today in this moment, and that you are okay. All right, you guys, there's a lot more to my story, but I'm running low on time. I hope this was helpful. When I see force and control, when I see shame running the show, I try to call it out, because I refuse to go back to the old way of doing things. So you guys, if this was helpful, please leave a review. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.